Kind of a wild day on the market, and here to talk about that with me is Ben Domenech. Good morning, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh, and I'm looking forward to the Army-Navy game this weekend. I'll be there along with a bunch of other folks. Who do you like in that?
We are a Navy family. Go Navy, beat Army. There's no other way. My son-in-law worshipped your father-in-law because my son-in-law is a jet fighter and thought your father-in-law, hung the moon. And that's fine. I played for him some of the times that Senator McCain would beat up on me on the air, and it made him happier. I want to ask you first about inauguration, Ben. Salem Media is giving away tickets to the inauguration to one ball. People can text the word Trump to 94878. But I have told people, text Trump to 94878, that inauguration people are of two kinds. Those that go because they have to and those that go because they want to. Which are you, Ben?
Oh, I want to. I'm one. I mean, I know that's going to sound very cheesy, and Mr. Smith goes to Washington, but I actually have never. There's certain events in politics that even in my age, I have not lost the feeling of pride, and I feel like participating and attending inaugurations is one of those, covering them, as I have and as you have, and I think that it's a real tone setter often for what we are going to see. Obviously, we remember the first Trump inauguration and how it really, I think, ripped open so much in terms of what he was going to be as a change agent, that he was not going to be someone who was going to come in silently or going to be just trying to make people like him. And that's, I think, going to be an interesting tone-setting moment for him in this time around. It's an opportunity to, I think, as he said, express unity. But I think that that's also going to be something that comes with unity around the agenda that he has been tasked with and the mandate that he's been given to deliver on some pretty incredible change for the American people.
Now, Ben, I was there for the inauguration of Donald Trump in 2016. I was in the NBC studios, which are there on the corner overlooking, and we listened, and I thought the American Carnage speech did not bode well for the country. So I'm hoping that Trump's second inaugural will be more like Lincoln's first, where he said, "We are not enemies, but friends." What do you think he'll say? Do you think he's going to strike a different tone?
So, knowing his speechwriters a little bit and knowing, so much about the attitude that he's had that has changed and shifted with this victory, I think we are going to see a change in tone. The shock to the system that he represented in 16 is very different from the attitude toward him today. And we're already seeing that, especially in terms of the way that he's been greeted on Capitol Hill in terms of the nominees and the people who he's sending up there. You are, I think, going to see many Democrats who essentially this time around are going to do a replay, an alt history of things that they could have done in the post-16 environment that would have allowed them to actually work with Donald Trump. Now, there's danger here for conservative Americans who want to see that agenda put in place that's very dramatic and that goes after so many of the different targets within government reform that they want to see. And certainly there are going to be some Democrats who try to play into Donald Trump's interests in order to prevent that from happening or protect their little fiefdoms. But I do think that there's opportunity there, particularly among some of the more populist members of the Democratic Party. You see John Fetterman's attitude already being one that's more open. And I think that that's going to have a very different play in terms of the scenarios going forward. That's going to be one to navigate. Keep in mind, if you rewind to the post-16 election of Donald Trump, Ezra Klein in January was writing about how Democrats had an opportunity to work with Trump, that they could even potentially come to some kind of compromise as it related to health care and entitlements. And even Chuck Schumer was sounding that note very briefly in the aftermath of that election. Of course, what happened next is the Michael Flynn situation, Russiagate, the complete misdirection of the American people, in my opinion, intentional on the part of some and unintentional on the part of idiots, that took over the entire conversation in that first term and really prevented any of the Democrats from being able to work with him. They were going to be killed by the resistance movement on their own side if they were going to cross over and do anything like that. That's not going to be true this time around. I think it's going to be far more muted. in terms of people not wanting to be willing to work with Trump, and you see already so many people who, have expressed a willingness to cross the lines and work with him. But that, as I said, that's something that conservatives need to guard against and be willing to really criticize. I think from the right some of the things that Democrats are going to try to do, especially considering there is no single American taxpayer dollar that they don't think that they can spend better than you.
Now, Ben, I remember American Carnage. The torpedoes were already in the water. Comey, Brennan, and Clapper had already ambushed Donald Trump at Trump Tower. The women were assembling for the Pink Hat March the next day. Antifa was burning down buildings in central D.C., or trying to, on January the 21st in 2016. I think it's very different. I think the shock created that. The shock win created that reaction, and they thought he was dangerous. Comey, Brennan, and Clapper took the law into their own hands. But I don't think that exists now. I think he kind of intimidates everybody except the nuts, and they maybe want to get along with him. Are we being overly optimistic?
I don't think you're being overly optimistic, and I think that one of the other things that that really happened, obviously, that made the difference here is that we're not coming off of the presidency of Barack Obama. We're coming off of the presidency of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, with Biden essentially having been AWOL over the last 6 months. From any real decision making, and that's something that I think is a very different scenario. People were shocked to move on from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. They were shocked that Hillary didn't win. They were shocked by everything that happened. This time around, there's just less shock. People are not as surprised, and then the definitiveness of the win, at least in electoral terms, was one that clearly showed the American people are just not interested in going in this direction anymore. They want and demand change. And so I think a lot of these Democrats are looking internally right now. They're assessing which direction they ought to go. There's going to be a real fight within their ranks. You already see the challenges being launched by people like AOC against the older Democrats who want to still hold on to power even after all these years. And I think you're going to see a generational shift within that party that has been long overdue, and one that, even though it moves them further left on some things, it also makes them more populist on others, and that bodes well for the potential of Donald Trump to work with some of them, at least, on various issues of importance. That whole scenario is completely different than the one that we experienced last time around.
Yeah, I'm an optimist. I am an optimist. But I got to ask you about speeches. John McConnell is probably the best speechwriter in town, and he's got a great partner in Matt, but John McConnell is a gifted wordsmith. Now that Michael Gerson, another gifted wordsmith, is gone and Peggy Noonan is retired, you can hire McConnell. Do you think they will bring in outside talent? I used to do speech writing 1,000 years ago, and it takes a certain kind of approach, and some people are good at it and some people are not. Do you think they'll bring in outside help?
Well, they did originally in 16 and had basically Newt's associated folks parachute in to help out significantly in those early days. They've been in that world for a long time now and working on his speeches, and I think that they will get some outside input. But this is also the man himself. He cares deeply, I think, at this point about sending the message that he wants to personally send, and he cares more, I think, about these speeches now than he necessarily did last time around, understanding that they have more significance and weight. And look, you only get a chance to do a do-over like this once, and he's going to, I think, have more input from people and listen to it and weigh it. But I do think we're going to see that kind of unity message, because my whole attitude about the second term, for good or for ill, is that Donald Trump wants to emerge from this presidency being enormously popular. He is going to try to do things that he thinks Americans want and deliver on promises, but also basically not run into some of the same types of issues that he did last time around with spastic approaches to problems. He wants to be able to project strength and come out of this being a beloved figure. That was always the danger with him the first time around that I was concerned about. As it turned out, he was willing, because of how much his enemies came after him, targeted him personally, and became the kind of crazed resistance that they were, that led him to make some tough decisions that benefited the conservative movement and the country.
When we come back, I'm going to talk with Ben during the break about one bill or two on reconciliation, but when we come back, we're going to set up my conversation. I am back with Ben Domenech, who is the editor-at-large of The Spectator. Follow him at @BDomenech on X. Ben, there are two big debates in Congress right now. What goes in the CR, and let's put that aside. That'll be over before we know it. And then, do the Republicans pursue one reconciliation and budget bill or two? Incoming Majority Leader was on this program. Thune was on this program on Wednesday. He kind of lent towards two. Leader Scalise was on this program yesterday. He lent towards one. What do you think?
I think it's going to be one. I think that while John Thune certainly has his perspective on this, that is valid and has some way. I think that Jason Smith and I think that some of the other people who are working on the House side understand that they can't trust that they're going to get more than one good crack at this. And there's arguments to be made on both sides, and I'm sure that the incoming Majority Leader made his. The issues there, I think, are how much do you want to risk the possibility of having lost momentum as you go through this year with so many different big issues on your plate that you end up in a situation where you can't do the kind of things that you want. And that, I believe, is always a risk in politics. You have to strike while the iron's hot. And to me, that is the argument that's going to end up winning the day. That the House, obviously dealing with as thin a margin as they are, is going to have to come to real agreement within the conference about this, and we'll see how that plays out. But I do think that argument is currently prevailing on their side, and Scalise's side, I should say, if there is a side in this, it seems to me to be winning at the moment.
I hope so. I hope it's one, because it's too big of a risk to bet on two. Yeah. Let me now talk with you about ProPublica. We got about a minute and a half. I think the mask slipped when they went after Hegseth. And I think they've been backpedaling, and a couple of their fellow lefties are circling the wagon around them. But everybody now knows ProPublica is just a left-wing hit shop. Do you think they handled this attack on Hegseth well at all? And how can they get out of the hole that they insist on keep digging in?
So on the one hand, you could say, hey, it's not our fault. West Point told us something about Pete Hegseth that was not true. And we assumed that they were telling the truth because, of course, West Point's spokesperson tells you something, you assume that they're telling the truth. But then when you read the emails that ProPublica was sending to Hegseth's team, the very first email is, you've got an hour to respond to us about why he lied about getting into West Point.
Yep.
And I do want to say one thing, too, that is kind of a mask-flipping element of this. If you know anything about West Point, it's actually not that hard to get into West Point compared to getting into Princeton. As long as you haven't pissed off your congressman or, and have the capacity to run a mile and, have, the basics of what you can do, getting into West Point, while something that, is impressive, is not something that, he got into Princeton, he's going to get into West Point.
Well, I point out there was no predicate for the inquiry because not only did he get into Princeton, which means you're going to get into West Point, he then joined the Army and went to combat, which would validate the assertion he was almost going to go to West Point. Why do you think they went looking?
But to me, Hugh, that's also kind of an indication of the type of person who's asking this question who doesn't even understand that. They don't understand that. But look, they went after it because they're a left-wing hit shop. I've written extensively about what they've done in targeting Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, et cetera, and they exist to regurgitate these things. But as I've said to you time and again, they have a budget that you could not reach if you combined every major conservative right-of-center magazine in America. It is not something that people, for whatever reason, they leave this out. They have a massive war chest that they use to spend an enormous amount of money on people to do exactly this, to research and to go after.
Oppo research. We're coming right back, Ben. I just want people to know, ProPublica is Media Matters with a better brand. That's it.
I agree.
I'll be right back with Ben Domenech. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Ben Domenech is my guest, editor-at-large at The Spectator. Follow him on X at @BDomenech. Ben, coming up after the break, the bottom of the hour, Shyam Sankar is going to join me. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Palantir. And I don't know if you have read his PDF, The Defense Reformation, which he published in October. It's only 20 pages. It's got 18 theses on what have to happen at the Pentagon. And he's being tipped as the DepSec. I don't know if that's going to happen. But in terms of Defense Department reformation, especially in acquisition, do you think it's possible to actually get it done?
I think that we're going to have as good of a shot as we've ever had, Hugh. That doesn't mean that it's going to get done. You know the kind of barriers that exist to this. But it is something where you actually have some people, including the folks over at Palantir, who have been looking at this very hard. And they've also, I think, looked at it through the lens of what failed in the past as attempts have gone to try to make a difference in a real problem for not just the United States of America, but for the world. And so if it's ever going to happen, it's going to be in this moment, especially given the fact that you have a President Donald Trump who wants to strengthen the military and is very aware of the problem. You know, is very aware that this is an issue that, you know, he came in, I think, and was not really thinking about stuff like this, but then the experience when dealing with the Pentagon, with the situation in Afghanistan, and witnessing, you know, the types of waste and the types of problems that so many are dealing with, and has led to such discouragement within the American military. I think that this is going to be one of the priorities, and it's consistent with the overall approach of this is about cleaning up and dealing with these thwarting problems that have created massive issues for the American people and for the security of the country.
Ben, let's close with this. People think Trump is hiring billionaires. I think he is actually hiring successful entrepreneurs who have been so successful that they turn out to be billionaires or 100 millionaires or something like that. And that it's not unlike when FDR went to the Ivy League and emptied it out when the New Deal started. Do you see a parallel there that instead of going to Harvard and Yale and all the big brains that they used, he's going out to Silicon Valley and getting all their big brains?
Yeah, I do see that parallel, and I also wonder about the fact that when people are criticizing the inclusion of these folks, wouldn't you want to find people who had been extremely successful in what they had tried to do before? I don't understand the rationale of criticism of this way, especially given that one of the biggest problems we've had over the years in Washington, as you know, is all the people who come in who haven't made money, who are looking at their future through the lens of which jobs am I going to end up with after I'm done here? How do I end up on the board of Raytheon? How do I end up in the position where I can make a ton of money when I leave? That's something that none of these billionaires have a problem with. They've already made their money. They don't need to turn this into something that's profitable for themselves. And that's, I believe, an advantage. It's not something that is a negative about this at all. I appreciate the fact that he's including some of these very smart folks who are coming from outside of Washington, far outside of it, who can bring a new eye to many of the problems that have existed here for so long.
Last time he brought in Wall Street, and there's some of that still, but this time he's bringing in Silicon Valley, and we have 1 minute, Ben. Those are completely different mindsets, I think.
Completely different mindsets. And also people who are dedicated to delivering on things faster, better, cheaper, and they understand that that's something government fundamentally has not been able to do. They also understand the risks of the regulatory state, having gone through the California experience of understanding how dangerous leftism is when it takes over government and prevents the types of decisions that they want to be able to make as entrepreneurs and as creative people.
Thank you, Ben Domenech. Follow him at B. Domenech on X. Follow him on and his podcast as well, and over at The Spectator, where he's editor at large. Thank you, Ben.